In addition to the members of the General Assembly we're honoring today, we're also joined by members of our state legislative committee. These are dedicated advocacy volunteers that are a big part of AARP's efforts to represent our 132,000 Rhode Islanders on matters of importance at the General Assembly. They attend our annual legislative reception, and throughout the session, they're there nearly every week. And their purpose is to make lawmakers aware of our legislative agenda and to be informed on matters that are important to 50+ Rhode Islanders. It's all very, very important work, and we thank them. AARP's 2019 class of capital caregivers is a bipartisan group of elected officials who made a difference for family caregivers in 2019. This year, across America, 74 officials are being honored in 30 states. Capital caregivers are primary sponsors or integral to the passage of caregiving legislation or other tangible results to support family caregivers. We thank you for all that you have done, and the awards today represent that in a way that we hope that you will cherish. About 41 million Americans and some 136,000 Rhode Islanders provide care in their families on an unpaid basis. They care for older parents, for spouses and other loved ones, and in many cases, even their children. In the Ocean State, those services represent 114 million unpaid hours of work, totaling $1.8 billion. To say a few words about caregiving, it's my honor now to introduce AARP Rhode Island State Director, Kathleen Connell. Kathleen, unmute your microphone and please begin.
Thank you, John. And hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. We really look forward to this celebration, even years like this one, I guess, where we are doing it virtually. I believe that's the term we use, not virtuously, but virtually in any event. And I have to say that I have this past week spent a little more time than I had in the past in checking in on these Zoom sessions, and find that actually when you start getting a little bit more used to them, they work pretty well, even though they are not a substitute for the real thing. But then nothing's ever a substitute for the real thing, is it? This is a very special year for everyone connected with caregiving, connected with seniors, connected with AARP, and certainly the Rhode Island General Assembly, and the atmosphere and care that the state of Rhode Island has consistently delivered to the seniors and the disabled in our state. Far from perfect, but we have led the pack for many, many years in many, many aspects. So when caregiving surfaced as an area of real concern, people began to look at it as, well, first of all, what is it and who does it? And so, led by a number of experts, they studied the doctors, and one of the efforts was led by Ira Magaziner, the father of our own state treasurer now. And they issued a report, and Maureen Maigret will remember it, where they had sent their people into the hospitals to see who was delivering care. And they found out it wasn't the doctors so much as it was the nurses in the hospital who delivered the care. And then they were honest enough to say, well, the nurses were really a critical piece. But the staff, the ones who cleaned the rooms and answered the bells when the nurse was busy and lifted the patients from bed to stretcher, all of those things were part of the whole picture. And the more you looked at the picture, the more involved it became. But as it evolved, it became readily apparent that caregivers come in every size and shape, but overwhelmingly, they come from families. And they put, as John Martin said, countless hours into care. Some of the care is highly sophisticated technical stuff. Some of it's day-to-day running errands, and many of the people don't even consider themselves as caregivers. They do it out of love and concern for the person for whom they care. But all of them make it possible for all of us to be able to afford a decent life for our loved ones and go on with daily lives in the best possible fashion. So the infantry, if you will, of the healthcare system, in fact, are the caregivers, largely unpaid, too often unrecognized, but always a critical component in this. And so we honor those who help in making it possible for caregivers to carry on the work they do. And I just saw John Martin. Did you look at your watch, John Martin? Anyway, I know we're on a tough time schedule here, so let me wrap this up. Without the caregivers, we couldn't possibly continue to function as the society we are and want to be. And without the kind of legislators we see here with us today, it would not be possible for many of the caregivers to carry on with the work they do. So this is why this occasion always is one that excites us, that makes us feel good, that makes us happy, and that we wish was at the State House, but since it can't be, we're so glad you're here in our living rooms, or we can all be together in our living rooms, or on beaches, or whatever backdrop you could find for the grand occasion. In any way, thank you all so much for being here. And now I will go back to John M. to introduce someone you all know well. John M.
Thank you, Kathleen. I think that sometimes it's a throwaway line when you say, here's a gentleman who needs no introduction. But for this group, John DiTomaso needs no introduction. We're going to miss him here. We hope he will be a State House volunteer for us for some time. We know he'll always be a resource and someone we can turn to. We turn to him now to present the 2019 Capital Caregivers Awards. John.
Thank you very much, John. First of all, I want to say that when we sat down as a staff to decide on who we would honor, it was very, very difficult. And I'll tell you the reason why. We typically honor legislators that passed a bill and their companion bills, and we honor the House person and the Senate person, and maybe a couple of them are involved in that particular bill, but it's always for one bill. Well, there were 4 pieces of caregiving legislation that passed in 2019, and we felt that all of the legislation was very important. So what we did was we moved away from what we usually do, and we decided that with the okay, after getting the okay from our national office, to honor all the legislators that were involved in all 4 bills that were important caregiving bills in 2019. So it is a little bit different, and it's fun because we have more people here, more legislators, and you deserve to be here because you're champions of caregiving legislation. And along with that, I want to say that in order to pass these bills, you have to have legislative champions as yourselves, and also lobbying, an important lobbying effort. And I have to say that I just sent out thank yous to 40 members of our state legislative committee that worked very hard this year on our RX drug legislation to lower the price of drugs. That kind of went by the wayside along with everyone's bills this year because of COVID. But it shows the number of just the SLC members that did lobbying this year, along with, we also had members, not volunteers, that went to the State House and testified. So every year it seems to be getting bigger and bigger. And so I do want to thank those members of the SLC that are on the call right now that worked so hard. I also want to do a quick shout out to Alan Neville because I kind of dragged him over to the State House, or I should I should say, he graciously came with me to meet with the Senate and House leadership at the end of the session in 2019. He did a great job of helping to explain the various bills with me to Senate and House leadership. So Alan, thank you very much. Now, as we proceed to the actual awards, as I go on to your issue, you may want to unmute at that time, so you'll remember ahead of time to unmute. So the first award is going to be given to Senate Majority Leader Michael McCaffrey, Senator Adam Satchel, and Chairman Robert Craven for their work in passing supported decision-making. I also want to do a quick shout out to Bob Marshall, who couldn't be on the call today, but worked with me very hard. Bob represents the RI Developmental Disabilities Council, and we found with supported decision-making, the devil is in the details. It is a very complex bill that we worked very hard. We had meetings, and all of the legislators really took part in that and just did a great job. Supported decision-making, what that really is, to some of the SLC members who may not be familiar with it, is it establishes a less restrictive alternative to guardianship, where people, instead of going under a guardianship and having the guardian make all the decisions, they are still able to make their own decisions. They're able to retain their own independence, along with being helped by a support network that helps them with the decision-making process. So without further ado, I'm going to move over to some of these legislators. And the first one I want to introduce is Senate Majority Leader Michael McCaffrey, who's a PC grad with me, as we had mentioned, also a big PC fan with me, but much younger than I am. So Senator McCaffrey, would you like to say a few words?
Certainly. Thank you, John, and as well as the other honorees this afternoon. First and foremost, I'd like to thank AARP for working with me and Senator Satchel and Representative Craven on this important legislation, as well as other legislation. You're always up there at the State House, willing to give us your input, and more importantly, willing to bring people in who are affected by the issues in one way or another. Also, I would would like to recognize two individuals who worked extremely hard on this legislation, both of whom are retiring. First, my colleague, Senator Satchel. He was a constant advocate for this legislation, whether it was meeting in my office, whether it was meeting with individuals on the floor, but he kept working on the legislation and addressed some of the concerns that I had, as well as other members of the Senate had, as well as other members of the bar had, to make sure that the legislation would go through. And of course, John, we can't say enough about you and your tireless work effort up at the State House, whether it's on this legislation or other legislation, in addition to the budget. And both of you are going to be sorely missed in the future going forward. As an attorney, this is an interesting piece of legislation in that it addresses concerns about keeping an individual to have their own integrity, to be able to do things on their own without having to go through the guardianship process. And some of you may know what the guardianship process is, but it can be a long and winding process where parties fall apart rather than work together. Whereas with this legislation, you're encouraging people to stay independent, do things on their own, yet have someone there who's going to be keeping an eye on things to assist them, but not to make the decisions for them. And I think in the future, we're going to see how this legislation is going to help people rather than have them go into guardianships. They'll keep their independence and be able to do things. And once again, I'd like to thank AARP for this honor, and also thank all my other colleagues in government who are receiving the honor. I did meet with people from my district on this legislation, and they explained to me the different issues and concerns with it, and we were able to address them and answer their concerns and make the legislation proceed. And again, I want to thank them for their participation in this process. And hopefully over the next couple of weeks, we can get back up to the State House and move some other legislation, and particularly a budget that hopefully we're able to get more revenues from the federal government to help fill our hole. But always, you know, that next year we'll be back fighting again for more legislation that's important to AARP, as well as hopefully we see Senator Satchel up there in a year and a day to be able to participate as a helping push different legislation through. Again, thank you very much.
Leader, thank you very much. The next legislator that I'm going to introduce is Chair of House Judiciary and also formerly Chair of House Labor. I have to tell you, he has a great memory because we met a couple of years ago on some legislation in his office, and he reminded me that we worked together in the Attorney General's office for Dennis J. Roberts 40 years ago. So without further ado, Chairman Robert Craven.
Thanks, John, for the introduction, the honor, the friendship, and also I have this way of describing people that you meet, especially on the floor as a legislator. Some people grab your sleeve and some people put a gentle hand on your shoulder. You put a gentle hand on people's shoulder, and that causes them to pay attention to you. It's not only in the physical way I describe it, but also in your way of educating us about something that we will all face, and in my case, very soon, decisions such as this piece of legislation that the three of us were involved in passing. I have an interesting connection to this legislation. I'm not only an attorney and a legislator, as the leader is, but I've been a probate judge in Charleston for 14 years. So I've seen these decisions actually play out in real time, like reality TV, only it's not TV, it's real. And the sadness on people's faces to realize that, because I have to tell them what's going on, that they'll be losing some of their independence, if not all of their independence. And it's scary. This piece of legislation that AARP sponsored and that gave me an opportunity to get it passed through the House with the assistance of my colleagues, I've actually seen it begin to play out. It was a problem that lawyers and litigants would discuss, but there was not a solution. This legislation provides a solution to giving a gradual easing of problems, as opposed to going from I'm running my own life to a guardianship is in place and I really don't have much to say about anything. Whether that's reality or whether that's perception, I've seen the perception or the reality or both in the eyes of older folks that face this with me as the judge. And for that, I can personally thank you for making what used to be difficult decisions much less difficult, because this organization has a real sense of what problems folks face as they get older and they transition in life towards the end of their life. And none of us want to face it, but AARP, and I'll be 65 in November. So, I've faced with now all these Medicaid decisions and et cetera. And I can tell you, if left to my own devices, I would probably say, I don't want to think about it, but you folks do an unbelievable job, especially Kathy Connell, our former Secretary of State, of communicating that there is independence in this life and there's no need to fear it, and to embrace it is the better course. I've learned that from your organization, and particularly from you, John, and for that, I thank you for your service. I certainly hope you still maintain some form of a presence. And I always thought you were that kind of guy way back to Dennis Roberts, which was, I believe, 1983 when we met. So thank you very much for the honor, and congratulations on your retirement. And I am pleased to accept the award from AARP, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. The next legislator that we're going to move on to, Leader McCaffrey mentioned this, but I have to say this, Senator Adam Satchel worked really, really hard on this piece of legislation. You know, again, we talk time and time, you know, about champions, and all three of these legislators were champions on this bill. But we had so many meetings, and he was so dedicated, and he gave us as much time as we needed. Both Bob Marshall and myself, we met with Senator Satchel a number of times, and he was really a true champion of this legislation. So without further ado, Senator Adam Satchel.
Thank you, John, and thank you, everybody. First of all, I just want to say congratulations on your retirement. You know, my retirement's a little bit different. I'm leaving to spend more time with my family, and I don't think I'll be up at the State House as much as I was, but hopefully you'll be up there. I definitely want to thank Chair McCaffrey. I appreciate him calling me an advocate instead of calling me a pain in the rear end, because I was really on him quite a bit when it came to this legislation. And this legislation is about teamwork and forming a team for these people that need the extra help, but also need to be able to make their own decisions. And this legislation really is an awesome example of teamwork, because Leader McCaffrey and Chair Craven, you know, they came at it from the judiciary side and helped to give the input of lawyers and judges, which led to us making some changes to the original legislation that would, you know, make it so that we could pass it, but also make it so that the people that were going to be making these decisions in the courts were more comfortable with it. This has been a great opportunity for me, because my grandmother is still around. She's still out and about and driving and making all of her decisions, but it's nice for her to know that she can have a team that can help her make the decisions. My aunt and uncle live out in California, so I'm usually the one that's around to help her. And it's been a nice role reversal, because my grandmother's asking me for advice now, which is pretty neat. And that's how I approached it. You know, I looked at it in terms of my grandmother, who is healthy enough and active enough and still with it mentally to be able to make her own decisions. And, you know, but we recognize as a family that she does need a little bit of help. And this is a great opportunity for us to have a little peace of mind that we can help her and help give her information in these decisions, but allow her to make those decisions for herself. So I think that that's the best part about this legislation. Just want to thank you all for the award. And this was definitely one of the cooler experiences in my Senate time. And this was one of those bills where it's not just a feel-good thing. You know, it's going to help people. And I'm very, very happy about that, and very happy that we were able to get it done. So thank you all for everything that you did to make this a possibility. And thank you again for the award.
Thank you, Senator, and we wish you all the best in your future.
Thank you.
We're going to move on to the next award, which is going to be given to Senate Majority Whip Mary Ellen Goodwin and Representative Julie Casimiro for making the Family Caregiver Support Act more transparent. Before we move on to the actual details of the bill, I do want to do a very quick shout out to Maureen Maigret. Maureen drafted the bill. I know this may have been one of the bills that we also worked on a couple of years to lobby for, but Maureen did a lot of work on this bill, and she was the original drafter of it. So Maureen, great job in putting this together. The Family Caregiver Support Act actually passed in 2013. And what it does is, among many other things, is it requires an assessment of caregiver needs, including particularly family caregivers. We weren't sure that that was actually being done, and that's a very, very important area, because the assessment for the caregiver is essentially doesn't criticize the caregiver. It actually is asking the caregiver what tools do they need to be successful. So it's a very important piece, and we weren't sure that was being done. So this bill essentially makes it transparent because it requires certain reporting. And with the reporting requirements attached to this, we found that if we did this, then they would have to do these assessments. The state would have to do these assessments and provide the caregivers with the tools that are needed. Now, in introducing the Senate whip, I do have to say something. We could actually give the Senate whip a Capital Caregiving Award every year. She has been unbelievable. In 2019, it was this transparency bill. In 2018, she passed a public scorecard for long-term care, which was very important. In 2017, she was the sponsor for paid sick leave, which is another very important piece for caregivers. She's now a two-time winner of the Capital Caregiver Award. So need I say more? Senate Majority Leader Mary Ellen Goodwin.
Thank you, John. And congratulations and good luck to you on your retirement. I'm sorry that I joined a little bit late. I had a doctor's appointment that ran over, but I just wanted to say that we're really going to miss your presence at the State House. You really worked very hard on so many issues, all of those that you just explained, and you're going to be missed. So congratulations on your retirement.
Thank you.
And congratulations to the other award winners and the other recipients that I was a little late in joining. So congratulations to all of them. And I'm glad that you mentioned, John, Maureen Maigret and her efforts. I mean, because she's the one that brings the bills and sits with me and over the years. And I just am very grateful to receive this award. And I wanted to thank my colleagues in the Senate and all those that helped move this bill out of the Senate and over to the House and to the governor's desk for her signature. I mean, it's really important for Rhode Islanders. It'll allow families and to see the assessments that are being done at the nursing home and give them great transparency, which I think is much needed. So I thank you for this award. I'm honored to have it. I just also want to give a plug because you mentioned the earned sick time bill that I was the sponsor of. And this year, we're also considering a piece of legislation for caregivers in nursing homes, the Raise the Bar campaign for the caregivers in nursing home settings. So we're looking forward to seeing if that would be able to become law this current year. So I wanted to give a plug for that while I was here. But thank you again, and I'm honored to have this award.
Thank you, Senator. We're going to move on to Representative Julie Casimiro. And let me just mention something. This is really a first of its kind in that we have never given a Capital Caregiver Award basically on two bills. And Representative Casimiro had passed two bills. We're going to move on to the other bill later on. But as I said, this is the first because she's being honored twice today on her efforts on two different caregiving bills. So Representative Julie Casimiro.
Hi, everybody. I just want to say thank you to everybody who's on this call. I want to say thank you to AARP. I think the work that is being done for our seniors is incredible. Having been a caregiver for my mom for 2.5 years, I especially appreciate all the work that's being done and all the advocacy that's taking place at the State House. I am incredibly honored to share this award with Mary Ellen Goodwin, who happens to be good friends with my neighbor, I just found out. And I just wanted to say thank you. It's just an honor to receive this award. And I also wanted to mention that back in 1983, when Bob and John worked in the AG's office, I was still at PC. So thank you, everybody, for this award, and it's truly an honor.
Thank you, Representative. I don't know if you can see this, so I'm going to hold this up. This actually was in Senior Digest, the March edition of Senior Digest. Can you see this? Can everyone see it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. This is basically
Yes.
honoring, it says AARP is proud to honor the 2019 class of Capital Caregivers. John can also mention before he leaves a couple of other areas that he, through media that he utilized, but this is really beautiful. There it is. There it is. That appeared in the March edition when we thought that we were going to have our Capital Caregiver Award at the end of March. So we did want you to see this. And okay, thank you very much. We're going to move on to the next award, and that's going to be honoring Senator Walter Felag and Representative Julie Casimiro for increased respite care funding. Again, I want to do a shout out to Maureen Maigret on this because we worked very hard on this. With Bill Flynn, a lot of times we met in committees and we went to meet with the finance chairs and things like that. And we were kind of like the three amigos wherever we went. But this bill was so important. And just a very quick history of how important this respite care funding was. This actually bumped the respite care funding from $140,000 to $325,000. So it almost tripled the respite care funding, but it really, what it did was it restored it to a level that we had in the state prior to 2008. When the economic crisis hit in 2008 and they had to really tighten the budget, the respite care funding was cut down to $140,000. And within those 10 or 11 years, it never increased, it just stayed the same. So this, although it tripled, we were actually restoring it to the 2007 level. And by that time, what was happening is there were over 100 people on a waiting list to get respite care funding. Obviously, this is not going to go away in the future with COVID and with many families concerned about placing their loved ones in nursing homes or removing them from nursing homes. This has created a tremendous burden on family caregiving. And so respite care is going to be needed more than ever. So this was just a very, very important piece of legislation. So I'm going to first move over to Senator Felag, who, as we mentioned, was a classmate of mine at Providence College, who we didn't know each other at the time, but he is another one who's been a champion of legislation every year. And he is the first, he's now created another record for the Capital Caregiver Award in that no one has ever received it 2 years in a row. And now this is the second year in a row that Chairman Felag is receiving this award. So without further ado, Chairman Felag.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I just want to make sure I'm on mute. Thank you very much, John, for this award. It's been a pleasure past couple of years working with you. And we're going to miss you in your retirement. A lot of times bills are passed for your legislation being submitted and it being approved. But there are other ways to get the bill across the line, not always through passing it as a bill. You can get the bill through a budget article, or you can increase the funding for a certain item. In this particular case, I was pleased and honored to be approached by Maureen Maigret to say, can we help in this process? And I said, well, I would gladly assist it because it was a great program that needed to restore its funding. But there was one little hiccup along the way. When you said we increased it from $140,000 to $325,000, that was a $185,000 increase. And when we submitted the increase, unfortunately, they didn't get it right away, and they increased the amount of money from $140,000 to $185,000. So then we had to go scrambling to make sure that it was the correct amount. Maureen ably and yourself, John, brought it to my attention that it should be the $325,000. So we approached Senator Conley, the Senate leadership, and other people to ensure that that $325,000 was in that particular program. So I'm honored to work with such diligent-minded, career-minded people, professional people that allowed us to move this legislation forward. And like you say, AARP is a great organization. They really have their ducks in a line in terms of having their personnel up there at the State House, wishing us well and encourage us in the right direction to approve these various bills and to ensure that the proper funding is in there for those people that need it most. So on behalf of myself, I'm honored to receive this award. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. And you have a great memory. You know, I do remember that instead of increasing it by 185,000, they posted it for 185,000. I remember that Maureen and I and you and Representative Casimiro were kind of shocked when we saw that, and it had us scramble all over again. And I do remember specifically meeting with you and you bringing us together with Senator Connolly and working on that on the Senate side. And again, it was worked out on the House side. So yeah, it was really two different levels that we had to go through to pass this thing, to get this increase in funding. So thank you again, Chairman. Before I turn this back over to Representative Casimiro, I do have to say something that many times what is so effective before a committee is a story. And we try to bring people over to the State House, whether they're SLC members or whether they're AARP members or whether just older Rhode Islanders, to tell stories that are very compelling, that how this legislation affects them or how they need it. Very rarely, though, do we have a compelling story by actually the legislator that's sponsoring the bill. And this is what happened, because Representative Casimiro is not only a legislator, she was a caregiver. And her testimony on the respite care funding was riveting. And I just want to say, I remember that so clearly. And so I'm just going to turn this over to you, Representative Casimiro, because I know this legislation was very, very important to you.
It was very important. So John, thank you for your kind words again. I just want to say what an honor it was and it is to receive this award, and what a nail biter it was getting it over the goal line, because it was a nail biter and Maureen remembers that clearly. But yeah, no, you all know that I was a caregiver for my mom for 2.5 years. So this was really, really important. And I just wanted to say thank you. It's an honor to work with all of you.
Oh, thank you, Representative. We're going to move on to the next award, and this would be Senator Cynthia Coyne and Chairwoman Patricia Serpa. Senator Coyne couldn't be with us today. I know she really wanted to, but she couldn't get out of a conflict that she had in her appointment. But I do want to mention about this particular legislation because it was really a 2-year effort. In 2018, we were able to create a task force, pass legislation to create a task force to prevent elder abuse and financial exploitation. And Senator Coyne chaired that committee. And when we needed, we found during the testimony of that legislation, many people testified before the task force. And we found out that one of the holes that presently existed with elder abuse and financial exploitation was that you could actually be a guardian and only have a state background check. Now, why is that important? Because if you were a Rhode Islander that committed a crime in Massachusetts or Connecticut, it would not show up in a state background check. If you were a Massachusetts or a Connecticut resident that was a guardian for a Rhode Islander, you would not show up on that background check. So that was something that we were very shocked about, and we felt that the only answer to that was a national background check. So, but it was very, very late in the session. to pass this bill because we had had hearings of this task force for months and months. So now we're in May sometime. You as legislators know that's a very, very late time to start talking about legislation and introducing it. And so that's the dilemma we had. But I had worked with Chairwoman Serper before and found that she pushed through legislation through a committee in 2 days from the date that I gave it to her. So she became my go-to person in the House. And so I kind of explained, the bill, and she was very familiar with it from in the past. And within a 2-day period from when I gave her the bill to the point at which she introduced the bill and had the bill passed through committee, a House committee, it was 2 days. And this is the second time she did this. And if you know anything about bills, and of course we have a lot of legislators here, that's very, very impressive. And that's literally magic. So in introducing her, I was a little reluctant to say how quickly she passed this legislation through the committee, because I was afraid that when people found out about this, everyone would be in line asking her to introduce legislation and get a little of her magic. So without further ado, Chairwoman Patricia Serpa.
Unmute your mic.
Unmute. There we go. Okay. Now
Oh,
can you
there
hear
we are.
me? Okay.
Yes,
John,
we can hear you. Chairwoman.
okay, John, thank you for those nice words. I appreciate that. And believe me, if I get reelected, I'm happy to take any of your bills. And I'm really honored to be honored with such an astute group of legislators. We have some great people on both the House and the Senate side, but I have to kind of give a shout out to my own senator, Senator Adam Satchel. Adam, I am going to miss you. It's been a pleasure to work with you on some local issues. And I do wish you well, and I know we'll cross paths, but I am going to miss you. And there's some tough shoes to fill. But everybody likes a story, John, and I'll tell it to you quickly. And number one, I am a senior and I am a caregiver too. And I know that senior financial exploitation happens. I'll never forget, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, a senior who lives just down the road from me in a condominium complex. She called me one day crying. She said, "Mrs. Serpa, can you come over and help me go through some mail?" So I said, "Well, Mrs. So what kind of mail?" She was all upset. And I think she was borderline dementia at the time. And she said, I made a contribution, and she named the charity to XYZ charity. And since then, I've been inundated with letters and asks for contribution. And I've been giving and I've been giving and I've been chipping away into my savings. I said, "Well, Mrs. So-and-so, do you have any children around me?" Frankly, I was glad she called me, but I was surprised that she called me. She says, "I just have one daughter and she lives in New York." So here was this poor lady in her 80s chipping away at her savings because, as I said, I think she was on borderline dementia, but just felt that she couldn't say no. And I said, "Mrs. So-and-so, take them all and throw them away." She said, "No, I can't. It might be something important in there." She said, "Can you come over and look through them with me?" Well, I went over to look through it with her. And honestly, it was just all bogus. Some were bogus requests for money. So I finally convinced her to throw them away, but she had probably taken out at that point $700 or $800. And I think she had a few dollars to her name, but she had gone through $700 or $800 in contributions. And I know how some of these agencies work. Once you give to one, they give your name to the next one. So that's why I think this was such an important piece of legislation. And John, don't overly congratulate me, because getting that through in just 2 days was just a stroke of good luck. It doesn't happen all the time, but I assure you, I'll be there for you as a senior and as a caregiver. And Maureen and Kathleen, you really are an inspiration to me. I know that there is life after and during seniorhood, and I'm living my own life. And John, I wish you well, and I do hope we'll see you around. And I just want to thank everybody for considering me. I truly do appreciate it.
Thank you, Chairwoman, and I want to thank all the award winners. So you're just a tremendous bunch, and with this group, I'm just so happy to be a part of it, of the awards ceremony. And now I'm going to turn it over to John Martin.
Okay, thank you, John. Great job. I think John won't mind me mentioning to the legislators that we do have business still in this session. We are very hopeful that the Livable Homes Modification Grant Program will be renewed in the budget. You may have seen our open letter to the legislative leaders on this. We've had a huge response to that, a lot of emails into the offices of the Speaker and the Senate President. So keep us in mind when you do reconvene. It's really important and very important to caregivers. It's been very popular, and we don't want to see that fall through the cracks. You'll also see us again next year because we will be back to talk about lowering prescription drug costs. John put an enormous amount of work into this in the fall of 2018, and it's unfortunate that it was not up for discussion in this session, but we will be back on that. So a little bit about what we'll be doing. John had the print edition of Rhode Island Senior Digest from earlier in the year. That was in March, announcing what was to have been the State House event. And we will be rerunning that ad in the August issue of Senior Digest. We'll also be posting the session on Facebook and on our webpage. A little bit more information about what is to be expected next from my colleague, Darlene Reza-Rossi. Darlene?
Hello, everyone. So unfortunately, as we said, we're not able to present these in person, but I think this virtual format is working out well. It's so great to see all your faces. We did create a digital award for you, and I'll share with you right now on my screen so you can see an example of it. Hopefully you can all see that.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so that's an example of the Senate Majority Leader McCaffrey's, and I'll just read it to you so you can all see what it will say. AARP thanks you for advancing policies this year to improve supports for family caregivers who are making it possible for their parents, spouses, children with disabilities, and other loved ones to live independently at home. So each of these has your name on it, and I will be sending it to you after this event. To each of you, and please know that we do have actual framed hard copies in our office, so when we are able to go back to our office in early September, then I will be getting in touch with you and we'll get them to you, mail them to you, drop them off to you any way that we can get them to you. So again, congratulations to everyone, and I'm going to give it back to John Martin for some closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Darlene. That's going to conclude this session. We thank you all for making time to be with us today, legislators as well as members of our Senior Legislative Committee. Dunkin' Donuts says America runs on donuts. At AARP, we say AARP runs on volunteers. So we thank those members, and also to Wayne Zifkak, who was our coordinator for this Zoom session. I'm going to draw on one other thing that's said annually. The Jewish Seder ends on a joyous note next year in Jerusalem. So we will end this and we will say, for Capital Caregivers 2020, next year at the State House.
Yes.
So thank you all again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye now.
Thank you.